Hello, and thank you for joining us at Houston House for the 2021 South by Southwest Virtual Conference. My name is Bethany Miller, and I'm Vice President of Regional Economic Development at the Greater Houston Partnership, the region's principal business organization. I'm really excited to talk to you all today about one of my favorite topics, Houston. It's the nation's fourth largest city, and we're a vibrant metro powered by one of the youngest, fastest growing, and most diverse populations anywhere in the world. To set some context and discuss the progress in building Houston's thriving innovation ecosystem, I'm joined by two prominent leaders from the community, Sandy Garcia, Managing Partner of the HX Venture Fund, and Harvin Moore, President of Houston Exponential. Sandy and Harvin, thank you for joining us today. To get things started, I want to give you guys just a brief minute to introduce yourself. So Sandy, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're from?
Sure. Thanks, Bethany. Happy to do so. Sandy Garcia, Managing Director of HX Venture Fund, alongside my partners, Guillermo Borda and Elise Hobson. We are a corporate venture capital fund of funds. We partner with large corporations here in Houston, commingle their capital together into one fund, and then invest that fund in multiple underlying venture funds. All funds whose investment strategy is interested in funding Houston startups. So our purpose as HX Venture Fund is to help grow the Houston tech ecosystem by providing venture capital to our region.
Harvin, tell us a little bit about Houston Exponential.
Thanks a lot, Bethany. Houston Exponential is an independent nonprofit that was created about 4 years ago when the two task forces, one begun by the mayor of Houston and city council, and the other by the Greater Houston Partnership, were created around the problem that Houston was the fourth largest city, but it was something around 19th in venture capital. And that therefore there was this very important missing element here in Houston. You know, we were very good at many things, but we just didn't have a good rate of startup formation. So they looked around the country for best practices, and they found a number of them, including, for one, the need for a fund of funds. So HX Venture Fund came about as a result of that, and also the creation of this entity as a convener, as a collaborator. We're in this state and in this city. This is about kind of free markets. In fact, Houston more free than any other city in Texas because of its unzoned status. It's the largest unzoned city in the United States. But very much around, instead of control and governance and design, it was really about collaboration. How do you convene the growing number of partners in the ecosystem and leave it organic so that it changes over time? So we have a mission, but not really a precise program. We are flexible as time goes on. So more or less, that's kind of what we do and the way we do it. And happy to talk a little bit more about how it's gone so far.
Well, Harvin, you mentioned the last 4 years. So, I mean, what is it about the last 4 years in Houston's innovation ecosystem? How has it been evolving and changing?
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the first areas of focus that we had in the beginning of this initiative was the realization that one of the main partners that was needed to raise this rate of startup formation were what's called startup development organizations, or SDOs, and they're also called tech hubs. They're accelerators, incubators, co-working spaces are examples of these. And there were at that time very few in Houston. As recently as about 6 years ago, there were about 5 of these, and only one was really of any great size. Now there are over 35 startup development organizations, an even greater number if you broaden the definition a little bit about of that. But tech hubs and accelerators, some of them were started here and just grew organically and filled in market niches. Other times we actually worked as an organization and as a city with our partners to draw in some of the best of those kinds of organizations from around the country. So Mass Challenge was attracted here to Houston to open an office, and that's been an excellent one. Plug and Play is another generator. And then Greentown Labs, which is we're only the second location of Greentown Labs. So I guess I would say, first of all, we focused on partners that were needed to help spread the word, make it more inclusive, the curriculum, the information, the mentor networks, those other kinds of things in addition to just facilities and proximity that leads to startup creation and people bumping into each other, exchanging ideas, and failing faster, stealing each other's talent, all that kind of stuff that is actually really, really good for innovation. And then we knew that over time that you would begin to see the indicators that come a little bit later, like the funding, which has come. And I guess the only thing I'd say on that, of course, Sandy's going to know a lot about that because that's specifically the area they're involved in. But the amount of funding, if you look at a graph, which is nice to look at on the HoustonExponential.org website, you'll see that really for like 6 years, the funding in Houston was pretty flat. And starting really 4 years ago, the VC funding, it's volatile because big deals happen. But I mean, it's been a completely different shape, trend, and it's up 250% over the last 4 years. It's been up every year. And this year in 2020, despite COVID and the energy crunch that occurred in Houston, really a double black swan event for our economy, the VC funding in Houston went up to its highest level ever. So the indications are good, but we're still just beginning. We're an early stage ecosystem, and there's a lot more that's still happening.
So, Sandy, are you as bullish as Harvin is on the funding front for innovation?
Absolutely. I think Harvin laid it out well. We're in the early innings of this journey, and we've already seen significant traction. And I'm really excited about looking forward to, if you look from the past 4 years and I consider the next 4 years, I think the growth is truly exponential. So as an example, in the last 4 years, we've raised as HX Venture Fund $40 million from Houston corporates, 18 institutional investors, and we've deployed most of that capital across 11 different venture funds. These funds are diversified by stage of investment and by technology focus. And the reason we've done that is we've created a portfolio of venture capital that is interested in all kinds of startups, the kinds of startups happening here in Houston. So perhaps you are a seed investor looking for product market fit in a B2B SaaS kind of world. Or maybe you're a growth equity type investor. You're in a later stage of development, developing a medical device for the life science community. Or perhaps you're doing something with new energy, with energy conservation and the circular economy. In any of those verticals, we have venture capital relationships that are interested in finding those Houston entrepreneurs and funding them. And that's a great thing for all parties. When you think of Houston, you think of space and you think of our incredible medical center. And you also, of course, think of energy sector. We're adding a fourth significant vertical here, which is technology-enabled software as a service. And it's part of that whole software eating the world dynamic, which is going to happen in Houston no matter what. But I think with the efforts of the nonprofit Houston Exponential and the for-profit HX Venture Fund, it will be happening even faster. And that's important.
I like that the work that you mentioned to fund these innovative companies is not exclusively focused on any one energy or industry, I should say. Right. There's lots of opportunity to go around. And I think that's one of the things that makes the Houston market really dynamic.
Exactly. So, and Bethany, I know you're integral to all of these activities in the region and would love to hear what you think sort of the most significant developments have been in the economic sphere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Houston does a really good job of exploiting the strengths of what we bring to the table from a talent and an industry perspective, and then aligning that with where we expect to see major market movement. So some of the stuff that you mentioned, life sciences, I mean, we have these higher education institutions sitting at the Texas Medical Center. Obviously, TMC is unique to our market, and they're spinning out researchers, practitioners, startups. You mentioned aerospace, I think, and we have the Johnson Space Center and the Houston Spaceport. You're not going to find those two things anyplace else in the world. And the expertise and talent that, is required to take space exploration for humankind to the next level. And then, of course, we're going to talk more about this a little bit later, but Energy 2.0, Houston is widely recognized as the oil and gas capital of the world. But they're really smart folks here and really important companies here that are working every single day on finding solutions that will fuel the world while at the same time reducing our carbon footprint. And so the Economic Development Division has been laser focused lately on how we can recruit companies that are working in those three spaces and grow the global economy from our regional footprint. Can you tell us how you feel like Houston Tech and Innovation here is different than it is from other tech hubs? And what are some of the other ways?
So I'll throw out something on that. First, I want to point out to anyone who's listening who knows about innovation ecosystems, they're everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
this is not unique to it may feel unique in Houston, just as being a tech ecosystem, feels unique in Nashville, because it's amazing what's going on in Nashville, Indianapolis, Austin, Dallas, all over Miami, all over the place. So this is not the only place it's happening. And that's important because when you're looking around for best practices, as we try to do, we try to compliment people by stealing their very best ideas. That's as a nonprofit, that's one of our principles. But we think that we do have some things that are unique to Houston, which are really important. And actually, one I'm going to mention, Bethany, that you just touched on is aerospace. And this hasn't even happened yet. Yes, we're called Space City. And so that's been first word spoken from the moon. Everybody knows all that. Everybody knows the Johnson Space Center is here. But I'm telling you, there are things that are really starting to come together in that particular area in the sort of field of growth stage companies, with the amazing development of intuitive machines and then Axiom Aerospace. And Axiom Aerospace became, just in the recent couple months, the second unicorn in the history of Houston. Other cities have had many unicorns. By the way, this is our mascot. The HX mascot is the unicorn. So you can ask if we're bullish on things, but we're actually unicornish. But in any case, Axiom Aerospace they've raised now over $300 million at far in excess of a $1 billion valuation. They sold 4 spots to their crew for the space station for a total of over $200 million in addition to the money that they've raised. So it's growing leaps and bounds, and we're starting to see a lot of interest and startups that are circulating around that. So that's one thing that's unique. And then the last thing, we could say many things, but the last thing I want to touch on, and I think we probably ought to get back to it maybe later on to talk about it in more detail, but Houston has this really interesting combination when you compare it to the other ecosystems of being that among the largest cities and regions and economic powerhouses of the country, okay, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, things like that, we are younger, we are more diverse, we have lower cost of business, we have this huge economic engine, and we're having this boom in the ecosystem. And so to me, the diversity of the not only the industrial space and the fact that there's huge enterprise customers in, as you say, Bethany, I don't know if you said businesses that matter, but it's not just businesses serving other technology business, which is great. It's like the businesses that deal with the energy and health, which are two things that are never going away as long as we can keep innovating.
Your point about cost, Harvin, is like incredible. It's one of my favorite statistics behind the diversity statistic about Houston. Of the 10 major metros in this country, Houston is the only one with a cost of living below the national average. I mean, when you think about that, the size of our market, it should just blow your mind. So this is a great place for companies to come and experiment. They can afford to do it more here than they can in some of those other major metros.
Absolutely. And I would say it also differs, just add from a venture capital point of view. Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about innovation ecosystems and their needs for venture capital, we have some unique attributes that I think are a great advantage that I want the venture capitalists out there to know about, and our Houston entrepreneurs in particular, or entrepreneurs considering starting a company. They should consider Houston for many reasons. But let me lay out a few of them. From a VC point of view, we have, the engine, if you will, of HX Venture Fund. Every day we're speaking to Houston-based entrepreneurs who are looking at capital raises, and we match their capital needs with the venture capitalists in our ecosystem. So you have the support of HX Venture Fund in this ecosystem, and not very few ecosystems, I think, have that. In addition, if you're a venture capitalist, what you have here is, In VC, we have a common phrase: innovation is everywhere. It's relative constant in the US, which is a fantastic thing about our nation. We have bright, innovative entrepreneurs everywhere. What's unique, to your point, Bethany, here is we have diverse entrepreneurs. That is less true in many cities around us. And in addition to that, we have a preponderance of entrepreneurs in that seed and early stage of growth. Now, this is the inflection point for venture capital, right? This is where the excitement happens and product market fit comes together. These people are raising funds for companies at lower pre-money levels than you would find on the coasts. So VCs are interested really from just very logically, if you consider that innovation is everywhere, and pre-money pricing is lower in the mid-country and certainly in Houston, then that makes this a real advantage as a place to invest. Add to that we're one of the corporate capitals in the US, right? So in your own back door in Houston, you have Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies looking to partner with your startup as a potential pilot company, right? So you have customers on your doorstep here that can take your startup to product market fit and beyond just around the corner. I think that makes us really unique.
There's also a lot of companies that come here as a land and expand in the US, particularly from Latin America, but we're seeing it from other parts of the world as well because of the diversity, languages, the ease of moving in, the cultural openness of Houston, which really makes a difference when you're an immigrant, and then the inexpensive cost, especially compared to how difficult it is to start a business in so many other countries. Here, it's a breeze. So that's an advantage to Houston.
Well, let me take it back to something that you mentioned earlier, Harvin, about diversity. We are the most diverse city in the nation, Houston, which is an awesome attribute for us to have. I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about how diversity and inclusion permeate our innovation ecosystem.
Yeah, I'd be glad to kick that off because it's true. All you have to do is look at statistics to know that what you hear all the time, which is Houston is the nation's largest, most diverse large city, is just factually true. But and diversity is a great start. You really need that because without diversity, you can't get what you really need, which is inclusion. So if you have the diversity, but everybody's off doing their own thing, then you haven't actually made anything with what you have. And so the great news there about Houston, and this is a place I grew up. I really know Houston pretty well, but I've also spent a lot of time in other cities, and I really pay attention to listening to what other people say when they've moved here, when they've lived in other places, and then of course we read the papers too. Well, we don't read papers anymore, but we pay attention to the media, so we know what goes on. And there is something different about Houston. There is something different about the inclusiveness of Houston, which means although we're really at the beginning stages of real meaningful inclusion, especially in the tech, ecosystem, we have, I think we're going to find that we can do something that has not been done in the other successful ecosystems. Because if you're interested in inclusion, then if you look at the very largest ecosystem of the Bay Area, then you see that this actually turns out to be the least, probably the example of the most unequal and uninclusive. And I'm not trying to be declaratory and blame anyone, but I mean, there are statistics about it. And so when you get to these areas, that's where you see if you don't get to work early and have the right kinds of things going for you in this process, then we'll find over time that we've reached that point. And so even though we could say success, we billions of venture capital every year, we want to get to that point, really doing it in a more inclusive way. And so we feel good about that because Houston, just for one example, I think to people in the country, they may have been surprised that Houston was not a scene of violent protests after the tragedy of George Floyd. We were not surprised in Houston. I mean, obviously anything can happen, things can get out of control in an instant, but that didn't happen here, and that's not surprising. And that's even though he's from here, and his funeral was here. It wasn't just a protest. And that says something about Houston to those of us who have lived here for a while. We know how to convene and discuss, but at the same time, we know we're not there and that we're just beginning. So none of this is to say that we've got this solved, but we have a lot of good things that are happening, and some of which are we'll be hearing about more later in terms of everything from increasing our efforts in inclusion as well as increasing the amount of investment that's really looking for those kinds of businesses.
And I would just add, looking at the topic from a venture capital point of view and a tech ecosystem point of view, what we know is that great private companies are born from creativity. You have to have creative ideas and launch those ideas to product market fit. Creative ideas are born from a diversity of thought. Just by definition, a diversity of thought, as you go out in the circle, is best achieved, in my opinion, from a diversity of people with various primary and secondary characteristics. So that's really the way I see the world. The role that diversity plays to any tech ecosystem, and an enormous advantage that we have in Houston over most ecosystems in that way. Second point that I think is critical to tech ecosystem development is that those creative ideas with diverse founders, they're selling into a local diverse economy here. So when you're trying to build a company and find product market fit, you tend to start in your back door, right? The lemonade stand approach, if you will, right? Is this working in my economy? Well, if you're looking for an economy that is a sort of subset of the US, think about Houston as that economy. Because there are many places that I could mention where that's not the case. Here, you can sell in your backyard and get a market-based response on your product from a diverse community. And that's a significant value add.
One of you, I think it was you, Sandy, mentioned before, we started off with Harbin talking about the last 4 years, and you mentioned, I think, what's ahead for Houston. So let's go back to that. I mean, if you guys had to tell the world what you thought was on the horizon, in the immediate future for this place, what would you say that it is?
Well, I'll start that off in speaking to the world of venture capital, and then let Harbin speak to the other worlds. But with regard to the world of venture capital here in Houston, expect this to be a landing city and not a flyover city. Mm-hmm. It's already happening, but it's going to start happening en masse. If COVID has taught us many things, but one of the things is geographic separation is not as important as we thought it was. It has its value. Proximity has value, but distance isn't as critically a barrier as we thought. VCs that used to fly over Houston will be landing here. Today, they're landing here on cyber, and tomorrow in our new world, they'll be landing here literally and spending more time here. Why? Because we have the entrepreneurs, we have the creative ideas from our diverse community, and what we lack is venture capital, and that's an advantage to those VCs who want to attend. So I think expect that. From that, expect exponential growth, more unicorns and such, and also we have a credible corporate base here, but we're building in our technology corporate base, with Microsoft and Oracle and others coming. I think we're going to see that grow in an enormous way, as well as those kinds of corporations start serving our larger community in a bigger way. Harbin, what do you think?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll make 2 points, which both amplify what you said, and one of them has to do with exponential growth. Like I said, we don't just pay attention to what goes on here. We pay a lot of attention to what happens in other cities, what's going on now, what's been happening, what the trends are, why they happen, and that kind of thing. And so what's a fact about Houston is that we are an early stage, rapidly growing tech ecosystem. And when a massive economy like Houston, which has the really important things going on, like enterprise customers, like diversity, like low cost, and all the rest of the things we've talked about, when that kind of an ecosystem begins to take off, that's worth paying attention to more than when a much smaller city, like a lot of these wonderful ecosystems that are popping up in other parts of the country, a lot more interesting than that, frankly, when it comes to the how many opportunities you're going to have this year and then next year and the year after. Other examples of that are, as I alluded, Houston had never in its history had a unicorn, a private tech company valued at over $1 billion. And last year, 2 of them. And there are several, what we now call unicorns, because they're all beginning to pop. And that is an indication, again, of the things that we've been measuring, which is venture capital happens over time with most of it showing up, in the later stages. And as that begins to happen, that's sort of the lagging indicator to the things that we see every day, which is around formation and these creation of all these entities and partnerships that help make it possible. And then the only thing I'll add on what Sandy said about a place to land and not just to fly over, because before COVID and Houston Exponential was working on a startup database just to deal with the fact that Houston was completely spread out. We're the 4th largest city, as you keep hearing us say, fourth largest city, but we're the 89th in density. Now think about that. There is something really interesting about that. We were a big spread out city. Well, everybody that's lived over here knows that. But what that meant is that we needed to come up with a way of linking together and creating connections within our community so that it could feel more like a dense, small place, like some of the other ecosystems around the country, because there's real benefits to that. Innovation comes from people running into each other one way or the other. So we were creating this database to not only help that, but also to make it easy to find Houston from afar and become familiar with it, because we were in a sort of a flyover city when it comes to venture capital. And so by building this platform, which is called HTX Tech List, it's on our website too, HoustonExponential.org. There's now close to 500 companies, and I think it's one of the largest such databases, very high quality, very well tagged, so that you can do a search from wherever you are and become as familiar with Houston as you would otherwise be with something down the street from Sand Hill Road, because interlocking directors and the people, because everyone's raising money and they're doing their 4th deal or their 5th deal and so forth, right? So you got your network. Well, this helps to supplement that. And so the existence of that tech list, which was created to deal with Houston's lack of connectivity with the rest of the country and lack of connectivity with Houston, was being completed as COVID hit. And we turned out, wow, this tool helped Houston not be as affected as poorly in the ecosystem due to COVID, because when people they can connect without going to work, and they can be found without planes flying around, then that actually solved the same problem. So it created resilience, anti-fragility in our ecosystem.
And I would just add, also if you're a young company, first of all, submit your company on HX Tech List at Houston Exponential. And then when you're at the stage where you're seeking funding, look at hxventurefund.com. There's a button right there that says you're needing capital, and we will help match your capital needs to VCs who are interested in investing in this area. So between Houston Exponential, the nonprofit, and HX Venture Fund, the for-profit, there are so many reasons to build your great company here in Houston.
Well, this has been really amazing, really good information. I'm so excited that I got to kick off the day with you two. Thank you for spending your time with me and with us. And I'm hopeful that folks will get in touch with you at the websites that you mentioned, and that this is the start of a conversation that people are going to be having now about how much more attention they need to pay to Houston and how to get themselves and their companies here. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bethany. And thanks for everything that happens at Greater Houston Partnership.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Bethany.
Thank you.